Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jay Rothman, and welcome to Real People, Real Stories Live. I am absolutely excited to have in the studio with me today Sean Cuddihy, coming in from Buffalo, New York, not too far from Niagara Falls, and I'd like to welcome you to the show with me today, Sean. Welcome.
Awesome, Jay. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
You know, it feels like it was just a couple of 24 hours ago that the cameras were turned on me, and you actually interviewed me to hear my own backstory of life. And here we are today. I invited you in to reciprocate and for you to share your own story of from surviving to thriving. And so I'm excited to have you here, especially during this time, during COVID. I was looking at some statistics that have been published as late as October regarding alcohol specifically, not necessarily didn't focus on drugs, but with alcohol, it showed that alcohol consumption in the United States since the pandemic has started has increased by 14% overall between men and women compared to a year ago. In a study for women, it was 17% increase of alcohol consumption. And this is an absolutely stunning number that I saw here. This statistic showed that there is a 41% increase in heavy drinking for women. And so I could tell you that early on in the pandemic, when I would jump into the grocery store, for example, to pick up some food, the alcohol shelves were pretty empty.
Empty.
And so there's no doubt it was one of the top priorities for consumers to make sure they had enough alcohol to get them through whatever period they thought they may not be able to access alcohol at a store. But in any event, this our conversation today is one where Sean's going to share his backstory of life and what happened to him just a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And so at any time, Sean, if I should ask you a question and you're not comfortable answering it, with total respect, feel free to create a healthy boundary for yourself, and I will respect you, and we'll move on with the interview. But it's been some time since I've done interview on Real People, Real Stories. My focus this year has been on my other platform, Real Men, Real Talk Live. But I am excited to have you in here, and I thought that your story would be a great story to reopen up Real People, Real Stories. So what I'd like to invite you to do at this moment, Sean, is share some of your backstory with me, wherever you feel comfortable, where you'd like to begin, and we'll go from there.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks again, Jay, for having me. I'm excited to dive in deep. It's, I don't know. I don't know where to start my story sometimes. One of the biggest things that I always kind of start with is when I was 15, my brother and sister died. And that was kind of a big wake up call for me, just at a young age, getting smacked in the face and realizing, okay, life is short, life is quick, and it can end very quickly. So you kind of get that wake up call as a teenager. But moving on, I think something that affected me the most was ending up having a divorce. Back, I'd say a few years ago, if you were to ask me what I was good at, the only thing I would ever tell you that I was good at was being a father. I always knew I'd be a good father from a young age. And after I kind of woke up in the middle of my marriage, after, I don't know how long we were married for, probably I was with her all together for 8 years, but after kind of having this, what some people call spiritual awakening, I call a nervous breakdown. I found that I was in a relationship I had no business being in. And that was kind of a huge wake up call for me, because I realized I shouldn't be happy when my wife leaves. I shouldn't be disappointed when she comes back. And I looked her in the face and told her, knowing we had 2 kids, and said, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be married.
May I ask, at what point after you had the awareness that it wasn't working for you, how long did it take you until you had the courage to express that to her?
It was not long after. I worked hard for years, probably about a year and a half or two, really trying to become a vulnerable human being and talk about my emotions, my feelings, all those things men don't like to do. I tried doing them with my wife. I tried really working on our relationship, and she kind of shut down on me. So it didn't take me long to finally just kind of throw in the towel. I kind of always had that feeling, from the beginning, but it was no lack of effort. I did attempt to put effort into it, but by the time she was like, "Let's go to counseling," I was like, "It's too late. I can't go forward." So I would say
Mm.
probably less than a year.
Okay. Wow. That's pretty remarkable. It's simple, not easy to have the courage to go there. And the fact that you did it in less than a year from the time you really knew that it wasn't working anymore, it took a lot of courage. I could tell you it took me a whole lot longer than a year. And so I commend you for that. Being in touch with what was working and what wasn't. At the same time, by no means am I advocating that it's okay for couples to break up if it's especially when there are kids involved. Um, but what you just said and what I heard, if I may paraphrase you, is that you just had a knowing. It was something that you
Mhm.
knew deep within yourself that counseling was not going to work. And let me ask you this, Sean, why did you think that marriage counseling wasn't going to work for you guys?
I guess a lot of it was I knew she was only saying it. It was kind of an empty thing because I was trying for like I said for probably a year prior to try to get her to go to counseling or even talk about what she had to change. It was always what I had to work on in my life, not what she had to work on. And once I started kind of lovingly just being like, "Hey, but how about we talk about what you need to work on?" She just, like I said, she shut down. And I knew it was just to kind of save this marriage. I knew she didn't love me. She loved the idea of us. She didn't want to be alone. She's terrified to be alone as a human being. And a lot of it was just kind of empty promises.
Hmm.
Jay, I do want to touch on when you talked about the kids, and you don't want to advocate anybody just getting a divorce. That's obviously a very difficult decision for anybody to do. To know even when do I give up on putting effort into this relationship, because that's not an easy decision to come to. But as far as like the kids and what I told myself, I remembered saying that I will be able to look my kids right in their eyes when they're old enough and tell them that I followed my heart and I followed my intuition and I followed my gut. And I think that was important for me to be able to do that because I just thought about what if my son one day is put in a position like this? I would want him to do what makes him happy.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, what I'd like to do is invite you to kind of fast forward a little bit and share with me at what point did your, let's say, alcohol and or drug use shift or change in your life? Before you go there, though, I do want to just take a moment here to welcome our viewers and listeners that are watching us on live or catch us on replay. If you hear something that resonates with you, please, with love, feel free to gently tap your love button on your comments in your feed. And if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in into the comment section. We absolutely love to post some of your comments and or questions that may in fact come up. So if we can maybe come back now, Sean, to the question I asked about when did things start to kind of come out of control for you?
That's such a strange question to answer, I guess. With heroin and opiates, it happens quickly. But I think majority of my life, it was kind of you could have said at any point it was out of control. Maybe I was always working and everything, but I mean, there's plenty of those people, right, who abuse alcohol and drugs, and they never miss a day of work, never calling sick. But I would say, I hurt my back, and it was right after my divorce, and my now ex-wife, she left, and the kids, and the failure hit me hard. There wasn't enough self-love there and confidence in my decision. You start questioning yourself, you start overthinking it. And I just felt like a failure as a husband, as a father, as a son, as a brother, and just in every aspect of my life, I felt like a failure. And I think that really weighed heavy on me afterwards. I thought I was prepared for it, before the official divorce, but I was not prepared for it at all. And once I hurt my back, got prescribed opiates, all that pain went away. It was just numb. And that felt
Mm.
great. To feel nothing felt great momentarily anyway.
Wow. When you realized that you were really struggling with, you didn't say this, and I'll put it out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you mentioned failure, but what about, was there any guilt and shame that was part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely guilt and shame. I mean, I think that's what failure kind of brings on us at points,
Mhm.
right? At least
Yeah.
some failure of guilt and shame. Oh, I didn't do this. I'm not good enough. And all those other wonderful thoughts we get sometimes.
So now you have a back injury. Your doctor prescribes opiates for you for pain. And what happened then?
It was a realization of, again, like all that guilt, all that shame gone, for the moment anyway. And it just, I mean, your tolerance for opiates goes up crazy. So before you know it, it's really a common story you'll hear from people is it started with pills and you're taking opiates or hydrocodones, whatever. And you would swear to yourself, almost every person has done this that I've talked to, I would never do heroin. That's terrible. And as you keep going and your tolerance goes up and you finally do it, it happens real quick. It goes downhill real quick. And, it was, that moment of, there's a point, I guess I'm trying to think how to phrase it, Jay. There's a point where you end up coming to the point where you're not even thinking about anything else in your life other than how you're going to get high. And even when you get high and you're not sick from withdrawal anymore, as soon as that moment happens, you're thinking about how you can get high again and again. And it just overtakes your life. And it can happen to anybody at any moment very quickly if you're not paying attention.
Were you introduced to heroin by a friend who you thought was a friend, or was it just a happenstance? Just kind of you find yourself in a party or an event that it was available. What was that? What did that look like for you?
I actually never did heroin with another human being. So it definitely never came from a friend. My few friends that I've had would have slapped the crap out of me if they knew what was going on for real. But it happened. I was selling pills as well. And then that dealer ended up having some other things. And then that leads to that, once again, you're selling that, you try a little bit of that, you realize, well, it's cheaper and it's 10 times stronger. So why am I not doing that?
Hmm. So take us along the journey. What happened next for you, Sean?
So next, I guess you fast forward just really maybe 6 months, if that. I'm, kicked out of my girlfriend's house. She's telling me you got to go to your parents and get your life together here. Almost about to be pretty much kicked out of my parents' house, and I end up got my girlfriend actually, who I'm still with, about altogether 7 years now. She actually is the one who called the cops. Nobody knew where I was. Other than she only knew that I broke into her house earlier that day to take some stuff to pawn it. And she ended up saying enough's enough. I got to get him help. And she knew the only way to get me help would be to call the police on me.
Wow.
So that was a big piece. Oh, I was pretty pissed in the moment, to say the least. But yeah, and then in jail is, I would say our judicial system, jail itself, prison itself is screwed up beyond all belief. I will throw that out there right now. There's a lot of change that needs to be done, and that's another story, another podcast, another time. But that being said, it was one of the best things for me personally.
How long were you in jail?
Only a few months, I think 3 months.
And
But
that
it
was
was
after you were prosecuted at that point, or was that just you were being held?
that was during the figuring out all my prosecution, my case, and everything. The bail was ridiculous. Nobody in my family had bail, and again, kind of the only person who would have had the money to do that was the woman who called the cops on me, and she stood her ground, man. To this day, looking back, I don't know how she did it, but she did.
Well,
And
it's interesting, Sean, that in this moment you're smiling. It's just a few minutes ago that you said at that time when she called the cops, you were so angry.
yeah,
How's
oh yeah.
about what? I'd love to hear a little bit about what that felt like for you and why. Why were you so angry? What came up for you?
Honestly, Jay, it's funny. Most of my life, I've always been easy to forgive people. Most of it's just been a natural thing. So I was more angry at myself. I think that anger has always been aimed at me, and it's always my fault. And I've always taken that responsibility of I'm in charge of everybody's emotional feelings and everybody's life. I'm in charge of their happiness around me. I think that's something so many people do without even knowing. I think it causes us to do stupid things. It causes us to lie and everything else. But in that moment, I think it was just really. I remember the cops pulled up to my. I was in my parents' yard smoking a cigarette, and they pulled up, and I ran to the back fence, and I had my foot on top of the fence to hop over it to the other street, the neighbors, and I just stopped. I was like, "Enough's enough. I'm done. I can't keep doing this. Like, how long am I going to keep doing this? I'm going to be dead soon." And I just finally went in with the cops, but the anger was definitely more always kind of directed at me. And I remember she kind of sent me a text message as I was heading down to the police station, and it said, "This is your opportunity to do some change." And I just remember texting her back, "Gee, thanks." But yeah, we definitely laugh about it now.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to step back for a moment here because you just touched on something. You talked about you having awareness that you tend to want to help other people. And I'm paraphrasing what you said and all, but it really describes a lot of codependent behavior.
Hmm.
You also mentioned that your brother and sister were killed or died when you were 15. Did you have any siblings after that, or were you now a single child?
I have a little sister still. Yeah, my
Okay.
parents had 4 kids. Yep.
How much of that loss do you think impacted how you then showed up relationally in your home and outside of your home, feeling like one of your roles was to save people or help people or create a space of happiness for people, feeling responsible for their well-being mentally?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay. I think that. I mean, I think that had everything to do with it. I think that had everything to do with my life. I mean, I barely have memories before the age of 15, which is very strange. And it's that's all first thing I remember, first memories of my life. I have earlier memories, obviously, but the first memories that stick out when I just kind of think in the past are those 15 that day. I mean, you can still smell the smells sometimes if you think about it strong enough when something that traumatic happens to a person.
I want to just take a moment here just to pause, Sean,
Hmm.
and really just honor you for stepping forward today and joining me in this conversation, because I know it's, when we go here, sometimes it brings us back to parts of our life that we'd rather not go to, especially if we haven't done any type of inner work to heal those wounds, those pivotal moments, those traumas, those experiences that touched our life and tagged us almost like a tattoo, an imprint at our cellular level and at our soul level. And so I just want to, I'm just honoring you in this moment for having the courage to step forward. I know this isn't the first time you're sharing your story, but your story gets really powerful as you're going to continue to share it. I'm really excited to hear what happened next for you and what happened when you found yourself out of prison? Were you actually, were the charges dropped? What happened? If you could take us forward now.
Hmm. Yeah, so I ended up going to short-term rehab, a long-term rehab, and that all was a span of maybe 5 months. From the short-term, long-term. Then I ended up moving into like a Oxford House, they call it, which is a sober living home. You know, a bunch of guys pretty much in recovery that live there, and they go to meetings together and do random drug tests. There's, a house of accountability essentially. So then I was there for 6 months. So, but coming out, um, I started a podcast, and it was interesting. Room 9 comes from my room number at my long-term rehab, and I started that, and then that kind of evolved. But my journey, I think, Jay, one of the biggest pieces through that time of jail and rehab, and why it was so important to me and why it was so needed, especially jail, as I said, how important that was to me, is I needed to be forced to face that crossroad of, do I continue going down this poor me, life handed me a bad hand, you know, I shouldn't have to work for anything, blah, blah, blah. Life owes me, the universe owes me attitude, or do I try this other path that I have yet to try in my 30, how old was I at the time? 31, 32, which was, let's try just having a little confidence and trying to figure out how to love yourself and believe you can do something other than what you're doing. And that was probably, once I decided to give that a shot, which was in jail, that's when things started to go pretty crazy awesome anyway, from that day forward.
So here you are, you're in prison. And how long were you in prison in totality? Was it, you got released once you agreed to go to treatment?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I had to drive, like court order drive. Somebody drives me to the rehab right from
Okay.
there, right
Okay.
from jail. Yeah.
But while you're in prison, you have this awareness that what it sounds like is that what you were lacking in your life was self-love. And it sounds like you knew then that if you could wrap your arms, all pun intended, around that idea, around yourself, that just maybe you could break your addiction to heroin and opiates and alcohol, which was also, I do understand, was a small part of the cycle for you. Is that correct? How did you come to that? How did you have that awareness while in prison that it wasn't about I want to get sober. I don't want to end up dead or spending the rest of my life in prison, in and out of the prison in the cycle of addiction. How did you have this awareness that what was behind it all was a lack of self-love?
Yeah. Great question, Jay. As I mentioned, one of the biggest cause of my divorce was this kind of awakening, right? This, oh crap, it's not just about sports. It's not just about Monday through Friday, work my job, get my paycheck, come home, have the weekends. It's not, life's more than that. And when I had that awakening, I stopped watching television. I stopped watching sport, and I really became this extremely introspective person. I started reading psychology books, philosophy, just, all right, how do I make myself better? How do I work on me? Right. And so that started, really, that was 26 at the time. That's when it started. The issue was 26 to my, divorce, after that, to my addiction, to jail. The big difference was I never loved myself. So as I'm not cutting myself any slack, I'm finding, oh, I need to work on patience. Oh, I suck at this. Oh, I suck at that. Oh my God. Eventually I realized I was just a piece of shit. I had all these things to work on. I can't even take care of one thing. Can't even become more patient before I add 5 more things I got to work on. And when there was no love there, no acceptance, it just failed. It became too much. I almost despised myself as a human being. And what happened is that was the only option. It was the only thing I was missing, right? When I was in jail, I realized that's it. I doing all the right things. I'm trying to be a better person, right? What am I missing? And it's, well, you don't cut yourself any slack. You don't love yourself. You don't let yourself have some downtime. You don't let yourself watch Netflix for a change and relax and take care of yourself. So that was really, it's kind of a no-brainer, I feel, when I was in jail.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to bring up Walter asked the question, did you have a mentor or coach after the sober house to help? And I guess I'll invite you to expand upon that. Of course, there's the other question of, when you get out of that, did you go to NA? Did you go to AA as part of your aftercare? And what did that look like? But getting back to Walter's question, did you have a mentor or coach after the sober house to help? What did that path look like for you?
Yeah. That path for me was kind of, solo, to be honest. I've been to tons of AA meetings, and I did try having a sponsor. I took friends AA meetings all the time. You'll find people in recovery are usually they don't have a car, and majority of them don't even have a license. So when you have a car and a license, you're driving people places.
Yeah, you're gold.
So I was going to meetings all the time, and I never had an issue with them, but it just wasn't something that never connected with me. It reminded me too much of church growing up, and there's some groups better than others, but it just wasn't me. I know it's changed a lot of lives. So it's kind of been my own journey. I mean, meeting people like you, Jay, and having conversations like this. I've met so many people like you. It's been amazing over the last few years. People with wisdom, people I can learn from and have great conversations from. I've always been a piece of it, along the way. That person has changed, but so yes and no, I guess.
You mentioned AA. I'm curious, did you do NA or was
Yeah, I mean, to me, those terms are interchangeable. Yeah,
Yeah.
AA, NA. I've gone, yeah. Again, I was driving people to both. I always kind of preferred AA. It was always a less shadier. A lot of NA meetings, people, honestly, as messed up as it is, people go there and sell drugs.
Wow.
But you'll find a little less of that at AA meetings.
Why did the 12-step rooms not work for you? What was it that what took you out?
Again, it was more because of the churchish vibes from them. It was very dogmatic. A lot of them are very dogmatic. Again, some more than others. Some are more loose, laid back. But it was it just felt like people were regurgitating words like you would hear in church a lot. And not all churches, just like not all A meetings, but there's a high majority of them. There's so much hypocrisy, fakeness, judgment, stuff like that. And it just it turned me off. Just didn't click with me, I guess.
Okay, that's okay. And I asked the question not because I'm here to judge at all. This is a no judgment zone, no doubt, 100%, no judgment. But so many of us, including myself, have stepped into the rooms, not just of, let's say, AA, but other 12-step rooms. And some people, it saves their lives. Some people, they get what they need. They leave the rest, as the saying goes, in 12-step rooms, and they stay for the rest of their life. Others do reach a point, from my experience of having been to many meetings over my lifetime for different addictions of my own. At some point, some people have created the foundation for their life and they step out. I stepped out of a 12-step group for those affected by someone else's drinking at about a 2.5-year mark, because that program saved my life, no doubt. I was able to unhook from my own addiction, which for me was codependency, was my number one addiction. But at some point, I reached the threshold where I didn't want to stay every day living in the story of my past. I wanted to. I had done enough of the inner work to come to terms with myself and my choices through self-forgiveness and self-care and self-love, that I wanted to move forward. I didn't want to stay raising my hand, continuously sharing the stories of how it was. And because every time we go back, our body is not aware that we're telling a story from the past. It can't, as intelligent as we are as beings, our body is not able to decipher, oh, this is just the story from the past, or this is still present. So our body will respond and react as though it's still in the moment. Physically, the physical end results of the words we speak. And so for me, although it was a very controversial decision for many people to exit out, because in the 12-step rooms, what they also talk about is that if you leave the room, then who's going to be there for the newcomer? And that's a huge hook that keeps a lot of people in the program feeling like, well, it's their responsibility because someone was there for them when they came in and they were desperate for help. And I totally get that. And I totally understand that. I get it 150%, believe me. But however, at the end of the day, for me, what I learned is I had to ask myself one of the 4 primary questions, which is it good for me? And when I was able to, now this wasn't a decision that I made overnight. I didn't just like wake up one day and say, okay, I'm done with 12-step room. I really paused on it. I prayed on it. I processed it. And then I continued to go to meetings, and I just paid attention to how my body in that moment was responding physically and how I was feeling after. And when I reached a point where it was no longer a blessing in my life, it was starting to feel heavy, like a burden, I knew it was time for me to step out of those rooms so that I could step in at a much deeper level for my healing journey. Because you see, for me, the 12-step rooms are rooms for recovery. Recovery is very different than healing. It's kind of like, when I think we talked about this on your podcast, when you go to the hospital and you have surgery or procedure, you're in recovery. But you don't spend the rest of your life identifying yourself as, I'm still in recovery from my gallbladder removal. At some point, your body heals. And when we have addictive behaviors, whether it be alcohol, drugs, codependency, gambling, food, work, cigarettes, whatever it is, sex even, I know that we've talked about this, is that the addiction is really not a problem. It appears as though it is because in a moment, someone like you ended up in jail. In a moment, we may have overdoses. In a moment, some of us lose our lives over it. But it's just truly a symptom of something much deeper. The addiction is just a symptom. It's not the root cause. And so let's take a little bit of time here, Sean, if you may. I'd like to hear from your perspective. What did you determine was your root cause of you're hitting your rock bottom? I think you've touched on it already, but I want to go a little deeper in this segment right now.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay. Man. Yeah, I would say, probably one of the biggest things for me was, my divorce, definitely. I argued with counselors about my brother and sister. I guess argue isn't the right word, but I've had counselor after counselor to try to force my brother and sister in the pain of that. And I would tell you I healed from that, or at least started healing from that earlier on in my mid-20s, when I really, again, I had that kind of awakening, and I tried to throw vulnerability in my life, and I realized I haven't cried for probably 10 years, and I just really started seeing the beauty in weeping and how a tool is that. And ironically, that happened from laughing with my good friend the one time. We were laughing, and that, cheeks hurting, gut hurting, you want to stop, snot running laughter.
Beautiful.
And I remember afterwards thinking, wow, that's the same exact feeling you get after you're done weeping. Gut hurting, snot running down your nose, tears running down your face. But that deep weeping afterwards, different reasons that you're doing it and more painful, but still the same release. And you feel this weightlessness after it. And I realized I needed to implement that into my life. So that being a long-winded way of saying I was felt like I was dealing and facing my brother and sister dying. So really a lot of my use and my escapism and my pain came from my divorce. A big piece of it was I allowed her to leave New York State. She told me she would obviously work with me and wouldn't go crazy. So because she had no family, and I just felt guilt from breaking her heart. And I let her go back down to Florida. And she is now, to this day, still, it's a struggle to see my kids and talk to them. But I had so much guilt and shame because my parents don't get to see them. My sister, my grandparents, my family doesn't get to see the kids. And that was a huge piece of it, was really just from my divorce. So much of my shame and guilt stemmed from that, Jay.
How did you overcome the guilt and the shame and the blame and that heavy burden, which basically is, I'll break it down in a simpler terms, it's living in bondage. We're in a bondage to very, 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 very toxic, heavy emotions and feelings that basically paralyze us. This is my own experience of having gone through that. How did you break free of the guilt and shame? What did that process look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was a step-by-step process we could hand people, right? um, I'm gonna try not to speak in too many riddles here, but try to describe it as best as I possibly can. And the best way to do that is, there's an Alan Watts quote, who's up there in my top 5 favorite people in the world. Great thinker, way ahead of his time, brought Eastern and Western thought together in such a beautiful way. And he always said, as soon as you feel free to be stuck or unstuck, you're unstuck. And I think that was one of the biggest things for me, was just to learn how to go with it, not fight it. You just, in Eastern philosophical terms, it's the Tao, right? You just go with it. You go with the current as a ball floating down a stream. When it speeds up, you go with it. And as soon as I kind of was able to have that connect a little bit and start to really work on that, it was a thing. All of a sudden, pain and suffering and agony doesn't go away, but has a strange beauty and peace in it at times.
Beautiful.
And really working on that was such a huge piece.
I want to post this up here, read it out loud. Kristen says, out of curiosity, if you know someone who has an addiction and continuously in programs and is in a codependent environment, what are your thoughts on getting on a road to recovery? Now, this is a loaded question, but I'm going to invite you to tackle it, and then I'll share my perspective on this question.
Yeah, that's quite a question. Well, I'll tell you right now, one of the biggest things, nobody was ever going to get me to go to rehab unless I wanted to go. Nobody's ever going to get me to put an effort into anything working on me unless I wanted to work on me. And that's one of the things that you'll notice, again, if you look throughout the history of our enlightened beings, if you will. They always went to be alone and waited for people to come to them and ask them questions and talk to them. And you need somebody that wants to seek it out, that wants to heal that pain. And as we all know, healing pain and going into the darkness is a very, very difficult thing to do.
Why do you think it's difficult? What's the difficult part?
The pain, the darkness, the things that hurt us, whether it was my fault or not, whether people hurt me or I hurt myself or made mistakes. I mean, it's all there, and we want to ignore it all, and to really go in there and find out what it is that we need to work on takes courage. It, again, takes self-love.
Yeah. It's interesting because I believe, I could speak for myself, the pain is there. The darkness is there. And that's why we're feeling it, and we don't want to feel it. So we reach for some thing to numb it,
Mm-hmm.
a distraction. Unfortunately, most of what we reach for are unhealthy distractions. I think when we're able to realize that the pain is there regardless, and the numbing is what's going to take us out or has taken us out, it's created a space of detachment from ourselves and from our relationships outside of ourselves. It's still there. But yes, it does take courage to step in, to really have that self-discovery so that we can really start to understand what is at the root of that darkness. And, the darkness will disappear as we have the courage to show up. A lot of my clients, when they're new, they ask me, where do we begin? And I say, it's simple. Show up and grow up. That's a huge part of it. The growing up part is us being able to, as adults, even young adults, say, I'm sick and tired of feeling this way. It's no longer working for me. My old strategies of getting high, getting drunk, misusing food, smoke, sex, gambling, shopping, whatever it might be, is no longer working. I'm out of time and I'm out of answers. Unfortunately, not everybody has that moment of clarity or that epiphany and says, okay, I surrender. I'd like to share my perspective on Kristen's question to us. And I think you nailed it pretty well. Unfortunately, it's got to be, for that person, it's got to be a 10. They've got to want it more than I want it for them. It doesn't matter if it's a child, if it's a parent, if it's a partner, if it's a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband or a wife, a sibling. Even sometimes I met people in the rooms that were there because they had their boss was an alcoholic and they struggled in their workplace in this toxic environment with a boss who was drunk. And if they weren't drunk, they were behaving as though they were that. It's referred to as the dry drunk behavior. If let's say they're sober for a couple of days. So the person that you're referring to has to be ready. I've met so many people in the programs that have been in and out of recovery homes, recovery programs. They drained their parents' savings accounts. And they've been in, let's say, 10 or 11 retreatment centers. And their story, part of how they raise their hand is to say, what was different between the 12th time and the 11 times prior was that the 12th time was the first time I did it for me. I was ready. I didn't want to die, and I didn't want to feel this way or live this way anymore. So it really comes down to, I could tell you that I spent years trying to help somebody else in my own life. And I thought I had the power. I thought I could outwit and outsmart alcohol and drugs. And what I didn't know then, which I do know today, is I didn't have the power. They call it cunning and baffling, and it is. The best thing we could do is, if we are spiritual or if we are religious, we could pray. We could pray for them, and then we can set boundaries, healthy boundaries. Your girlfriend set a major healthy boundary in that moment. She called the police on you. She turned you in. And in that moment, you said you were pissed off and angry. But it's possible that she may have saved your life just by making one phone call. And that phone call is the most difficult phone call for a loved one, a parent especially, to do for their own children. There are so many men and women that I met in the program that I went to called Al-Anon that their children didn't make it. Their partners didn't make it. They passed from their addiction. So it's real. And unfortunately, the success rate is pretty low in the 12-step rooms for addiction. I believe it's something like less than 10% people
Mhm.
are sober by the 5-year mark. So the question really that I'd like to throw out to you, Sean, is if it didn't work for you, and other people may be listening and go, okay, well, it didn't really work for you. If you were to able to kind of net it out, break it down as simple as possible in this moment, what did work for you?
Oh, man, that's a tough question to really look back and try to put down into language. It's because it's so hard, right? Because we're all so different. I mean, that's why even recovery in and of itself and addiction is such a strange thing, because to treat it and to do something, everybody's path is so different. Jay, I think really honestly, if I'm gonna go back, it probably once again starting in my mid 20s, starting this stage of introspection and personal growth and personal development, and being crazy enough to spend a month trying to understand one page out of Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Somewhere along the line, have just picked up tools, and I had all this knowledge, and that was my thing. I mean, you can't see them. I have hundreds and hundreds of books that I would read and study and rip apart, and and I thought that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna learn everything I can, and I'm gonna get this. And I knew so much, but did so little. And I think maybe applying what I knew to be true in that moment, or what I knew I could change, and just change that one small thing at a time, and take it slow, and don't put too much pressure on yourself, and just kind of, if even if it's do something less for 30 seconds one day at a time, and add 30 seconds to that, as long as you're doing something, as long as you're comparing yourself to who you were yesterday, not to somebody else's today, and you're moving forward, and you just make your damn bed. That's it. If that's all you do in a day, you did something good, right?
Yeah,
And those things start to add up. And the next thing you know, you're looking back, and 3 years go by, and you've won awards for your business, and you're doing it, and things are happening, and life's working out, and you're living your passion, and it just happens. You just, you can't give up, man. Right. And that's the easiest thing to do, is you want to stay down when you fall, and we want to feel sorry for ourselves. Self-pity is worthless. Is the only thing I cannot find anything good out of, is feeling sorry for yourself. I've done that my whole life.
mm,
And you got to get rid of that. Add some self-love on that. Just do a little bit at a time, and you're going to screw up, and you're going to slip up, and use those as the greatest learning tools ever. If you could take your failures and learn from them, and pick your head up a little bit while you're on the ground, it's so amazing what life can do.
beautiful. Where do you think you are at today in this period of self-discovery and growth? And I've referred to it as coming home to
Mhm.
yourself. Where do you feel you're at in the process of embracing yourself, self-compassion, self-forgiveness, and self-love? If we could put it on, let's say, a scale of 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, where are you at today?
Are you considering 10 to be like pure enlightenment?
Sure,
Sure. Okay.
sure.
Um,
Yeah, this isn't a judgment question. This is just,
yeah.
I'm inviting you to kind of do what I refer to as like a vital check-in, just from an honest perspective. Like, how do you feel you're coming along in that process of embracing yourself, forgiving yourself, no more self-deprecation, no more self-guilt, blame, or shame? Where are you at in the process?
Jay, I think, I can't say the last time I've ever done that. And I think that's because I've kind of learned it is about the process, not the end of the process. And for me, not keeping a scorecard of
Beautiful.
what it is and what isn't, and just taking it moment at a time. It sounds so cliche, Eastern philosophical, and Taoist and Buddhism, but it's true. I mean, those texts have been around for thousands of years for a reason, right? Something's working about them, and I mean that's what it's about. It's about the process, not the end of it.
I absolutely love that answer, because you know what that answer tells me, Sean. You're right where you're supposed to be. You're right there. You have that understanding that, because when we put a number on it, there is some judgment. We're judging where we're at. And not that that was a setup question by any means, but it was a beautiful answer. And I absolutely love what you just shared. That warms my heart space right now, because it just shows me that, like, you're on the right path. And you deserve that. Your children deserve that. And that's just absolutely beautiful. I remember someone shared, I was listening to a podcast one day, and he said, when someone says to you, like, I got it, I'm good, even I'm enlightened, that's just an indication that it's time for you to go back to the beginning, read the book over. Because when you think you're there, that's more of your ego.
Yeah.
Telling you you're good enough, you got what you need, I'm good to go, I'm done.
I don't know who said the quote, Jay. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to share this with you because it's a great quote. If you see the Buddha in the road, kill him.
What does that mean to you?
If you ever get to a point where you think you're enlightened and you got it all figured out, kill that thing and run far away from it.
Beautiful.
And I love that. Yeah, it's just one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah. We're approaching, we got about 9 minutes to the hour. Before, I want to invite you to spend some time talking about the work you're doing today in your podcast. I'd love to hear you share a little bit about that. Let's go there. Okay. Tell me a little bit about Room 9. What is Room 9 podcast? How did it start, and why is that your passion project, and why are you doing it today?
Yeah, great. I love talking about that. It's funny having a business, starting a business or an organization. It's like another individual where you have to become introspective and treat your business almost like it's its own person, right? And work on itself and adapt and change just like a regular human being like we do. And so I've been able to almost take all of these things that I'm learning in my individual journey and put it to my professional journey. And it has just been awesome. And really, Room 9 was, again, I think I mentioned it, was my room number at my long-term treatment facility. And it started with my roommate, actually, and it was just a podcast. We were actually recorded first 2 episodes of the podcast while we were technically still residents of the inpatient rehab. And, it kind of just grew from there. And I fell in love with audio production and just kind of recording and conversations and storytelling. And from there, I got a grant from the New York State Education Department and decided to get into video production. And, I bring up the business is like an individual thing because I've been dipping my toes in and trying to find out, all right, what do I really want to do? What do I really want my company to be and build? And where can I make the biggest difference? And what's missing from the community in Western New York? And, right now I find myself in multimedia production work with behavioral health organizations and just trying to help them connect with their audience more on a more authentic and real way. And at the same time, doing the podcast and just sharing stories. I truly believe the simple act of storytelling and somebody doing what I did or what you're doing, Jay, or whenever you hear somebody who's strong enough to stand up and, all right, I'm going to talk about this. And I truly believe that is the answer to ending stigma around mental health, to getting people at least to be able to say, hey, I have a problem. And we don't want to admit it. And I think if we talk about it and people are sharing their stories, it can change the world.
Beautiful. I love that that for you, it wasn't enough just to clean up your life. You wanted to touch other people and make a difference. Um, I respect you for that, because that was a decision that I made early on in my own recovery period, my own healing period of, I wanted it to be bigger. I wanted the story not to be about me, but use my story as a way to inspire and bring hope to others, not help. Because I'm not in a helping business anymore. Because the helping business is a slippery slope. The helping business can bring us into the old behaviors of codependency, which you touched on was a big part of your own behavior and how you showed up relationally. But to be able to use your story on your platform to bring hope and inspiration to others that may be struggling with addictions and or mental health. And you and I both know that mental health disorders is a huge part of why people gravitate to alcohol and drugs as a way to self-medicate. Now, I'm going to share from my perspective, someone may be listening and saying, okay, so the alcohol and drugs isn't really the problem. Society makes it the problem, and that's where we put the focus on. But as I said earlier, I don't believe it's the problem. It's just a symptom. Is mental health a symptom as well? Or is mental health disorders, are those disorders healable? Can you recover? Can you heal from them? Or do you believe that they are the root cause of addictions? Do you understand my question?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your perspective?
I guess I love how Dr. Gabor Mate puts it. It's not why the addiction, why the pain. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. I also, it's strange. It's what is mental health, right, Jay? I mean, we have these labels for them in the diagnostic statistical manual, right? We have labels so we can put them in a box and call them something. But everything we do, even when we break our arm, it involves our mental health, everything we're doing. And for some reason along the line of humanity, we have said when we talk about that, it's weakness. And I mean, everything we do that we're struggling with to change is involved with our mental health. And so, I'm always about, it's more than you have to stop using the drug. Physiologically, it sucked coming off of heroin, let me tell you. But that was the easiest part, hands down. The toughest part was, all right, how am I going to break not only my habits now that I've had for so long, how am I going to break these walls, to figure out why am I really using? Because I can't do it without help, without talking about it, without sharing it with people, without kind of diving into it, or else you're going to continue to relapse.
I'm pausing because I'm processing what I just heard. I believe, this is just my own experience. I do believe that I know I suffered with a mental health disorder. I was diagnosed, given a label, and given pharmaceuticals for 21 years for a generalized anxiety disorder. It's not uncommon. Why? Because as human beings, we all struggle. We all have moments of anxiety. But when it becomes chronic and excessive and it's amped up, it can impact our ability to function in our best way in life. And so for me, that was a mental health disorder that I struggled with. And that's another code in pharmaceuticals that I shredded. I took it out of my life. Because what I didn't know and what I wasn't taught in 21 years of being in counsel with therapists was that what I needed to learn how to do is behavior modification. I needed to learn how to manage and how to reach for healthy tools to dissolve or release the anxiety in a moment, and or in a moment be able to manage it, just like be able to accept it and not allow it to define who I am and who I was through a medical code or diagnosis. And so for me, from my own experience, I've interviewed many, many men and women that were diagnosed with mental health disorders, even like schizophrenia, bipolar, that were on massive drugs for decades. I mean, 15, 20 pills a day for mental health, and they're drug free today. And they affirm that they no longer live in that disease or that disorder, that they are free of it. And so um, that's another story for another time. But I do believe that we have the ability to do some healing on mental health disorders, and I do believe that the mental health disorder not necessarily the root cause of our problem. It's a symptom. The root cause really can be healed once we go in and we work on the inner wounds, traumas, pains, pivotal moments that impacted our lives. It's possible that we can move forward in our life as you have experienced to a large degree.
Mm-hmm.
And no longer live in the confines, the bondage of addiction. And here's where I do believe there is hope for others. So with what time we do have left, Sean, I'd like to invite you to perhaps maybe share some closing thoughts for one person, one viewer that may pick up the show on live or on replay, that may touch their lives. And then we could talk real briefly about how people can get hold of you if they want to potentially be a guest on your podcast, share their story, and or just communicate with you.
Yeah, I guess, kind of sum things up. And, in my podcast, I always randomly throw out there to people at the end, you have a couple minutes to share with the world your best advice or what you would like to see happen, or, what advice would you do? So I guess I'll just kind of go with that. And one of the biggest things I've touched on, obviously, one of them is really figuring out how to love yourself and not feel responsible for the emotion of other people and the feelings of other people. But a big piece of that was for me too, was learning from my failures, learning to look at failure as a tool as opposed to a failure. Jay, I don't know if it was you who had used a different term, who doesn't use the word failure. I talked to somebody recently. I don't remember what word they used, but learning from your failure, I think, is such a huge thing. And, for me at this point, it's almost like I look forward to the next one, or ready for it, because you grow so much quicker when you pay attention throughout your failures. So that was a huge piece for me. I think I really like to share with people.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think I refer to it as missteps.
Yeah. I thought it was you when we had a conversation. You said, I don't like to use the word failure because it does have a negative connotation to it.
It's really heavy. And there's a lot of I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm just not enough behind, for me, the word failure. So I like to embrace it as missteps. And but at the end of the day, even if we stay in the recognition of something that didn't turn out the way we wanted it to, how I walk through that today with dignity and grace is I just ask myself, what were the lessons?
Mm-hmm.
What can I learn from this experience? And sometimes most of the time, the lesson will be so much more powerful than the wreckage of what didn't work out. Because when we could learn from it, we can release it, and we have a really good chance at not repeating it in the future. So I think that's the gift that we get. We always get a gift. And a gift comes when we don't like the way something turned out. Even if there's pain, when we could figure out the lesson, we get to grow. And then we can hopefully mentor somebody else when asked.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How can people get hold of you, Sean?
Yeah, so you can my website, which I'm in the middle of a big rebrand. So my website is going to be changing pretty drastically around January, but you can go to room9, the number 9 podcast.com. And really, honestly, everything to get in touch with me is on that homepage. My emails, I mean, there's so many different ways. All my social handles would be on there. So to keep it short and sweet, I would say room9podcast.com. That's the number 9, and you can see what we have going on there.
And your email address, if someone wants to drop you an email, is
Sean, Sean, Cuddihy, Cuddihy, and that's at room9podcast.com.
beautiful.
And again, if you go on my website, you'll find my email is in there in big letters down towards the bottom. So
yeah. Sean Cuddihy, I'd again like to thank you for joining me on today's Real People, Real Stories Live. My closing thoughts, real briefly, is for me, what I've learned in my own healing journey is what so many of us lack is self-intimacy, which is part of self-love. And the greatest shortcut to coming home to yourself and really dissolving, healing addictions is through the gateway of self-care that brings us to self-love. Self-care is the antidote for healing. And when we're willing to embrace that, and we are ready to embrace that, we can, in fact, heal our mind, body, and soul. And so with that, thank you so much for joining me today, Sean. And let's keep in touch. Hope to have you back on a future podcast on Real People, Real Stories Live.
awesome. Thanks, Jay. I was grateful to be here. And thanks for everybody who was listening.
Thank you, guys.